This is chapter 3, page 60. We're going to start with population ecology. Remember what generalist and specialist species are. Generalist species are able to live in a wide variety of habitats. They can eat a lot of different types of resources. Specialists, they have very narrow niches, so they can only eat a certain number of things, or they can only live in a specific temperature, and so they're more likely to become extinct. And they are at an advantage when their ecosystem is not changing, when it's constant. And they're at an advantage when their ecosystem is changing because they can still live in it. They cannot. They may die. On page 61, know what population density is. Also know these three types of population distribution: random, uniform, and clumped. We're going to go on to page 64. You have to know what an exponential growth rate looks like, which is shown right here. It looks like a J, and it is rapid growth. So if this dove and another dove have 6 kids, their 6 offspring are going to all have 6 offspring, and so that's going to be 36 doves, and those 36 doves are going to have more offspring. So it's that rapid, unhindered growth right here. And that is happening because there are unlimited resources. There's enough food to go around, there's enough water, no predators, no competition. And all organisms have a different biotic potential. So we have a low biotic potential because we only have a couple of kids in our lifetime. If you look at sea turtles, they have many offspring, so they have a higher biotic potential, but that's the maximum reproductive rate of a population in ideal conditions. So that would be represented with a exponential growth rate as well, because it is in ideal conditions. Now, we don't live in an ideal world, so growth rates are usually, they become stable eventually, and that is because of limiting factors. So resources, food may start to run out, water, predators may come in because there's more population for them to eat. Diseases may also occur in the population, and so that limits their growth. And so the population reaches a carrying capacity, and that's this line right here. And you can see that white dotted line. It's a carrying capacity. It's the maximum population that an environment can sustain. And that carrying capacity is going to change in different ecosystems at different times. It's going to fluctuate. So if there's a drought, it'll be lower usually. If there's a disease, or if the space is small, if there's habitat destruction going on, if there's climate change, all these things will change a population's carrying capacity. And it's represented by this S curve. So a population will have exponential growth, but eventually it will reach carrying capacity. And overshoot, this is in your book actually, but on a different chapter. But when a population exceeds its carrying capacity, and it keeps rising exponentially, it's going to put a strain on resources. And so right now, humans have overshot. That's because we have kind of ignored our limiting factors. We've grown more food. We've kind of gotten rid of diseases, not gotten rid of them, but we've lessened their effect on us. But that can also lead to famine, disease, and conflict over those resources that are being depleted. And this figure and caption, no. So right here we have the dove again, and in Florida, the dove population reached carrying capacity because it's an older population. In the western U.S., it is still going through exponential growth, but eventually it's going to reach carrying capacity. So look at this figure and graph. And also know on page 66 what types of limiting factors there are. So there are density dependent and density independent. Density dependent limiting factors depend on the density of the population, which is how many organisms there are for an amount of space. So if there's many organisms, like 100 organisms in this space, that's more dense than if there were 2, right? And if there's more organisms, then that's going to put a strain on resources. So a density dependent factor would be water or food or space, even disease. So when there's a lot of organisms together, especially when they're crowded together, diseases can spread very rapidly. That's why in schools the flu spreads so quickly, because there's so many students in school. Also in feedlots, there's a lot of chickens, and they're constantly having to spray antibiotics because those diseases are spreading so rapidly. And density independent factors are like natural disasters, like fires and floods and tornadoes. Those don't depend on the size of the population. They're a little more random. So know these in some examples. And then carrying capacity, how carrying capacity changes. We just talked about those: floods, fires, diseases, water, all those things. We have actually exceeded our carrying capacity, which we also talked about. So read that that paragraph. And then survivorship curves are very important. And here are some survivorship curves right here. There are 3 types of survivorships. We are type 1, and so are mammals and whales and predators. They're usually type 1, which means that when we're young, we tend to survive birth and childhood compared to other species. And then we will die more of us will die when we're old. Type 2, it's kind of a constant rate of survivorship, how many organisms survive, and usually it's like birds. And then type 3, like frogs or turtles or prey animals, plants, they're type 3. And so they will have a large population at the beginning of their lifetime, but they will die very quickly. So only a couple will survive. And then the ones that do survive will live to a very old age. Okay, so know these 3 and these descriptions, which I just went through. And then this. So know K-selected and R-selected species. K-selected species, they're large, they have few offspring, and they put a lot of energy in parental care. And that is like humans. Again, we will have 1 or 2 kids at a time. We will put a lot of energy into raising those kids. But so like elephants, mammals, again, are K-selected, have long lifespans, and are usually type 1 or type 2 on the survivorship curve. And then R-selected are small, usually small. They have many offspring. They don't put a lot of energy into parental care, so they'll have thousands of kids and then not really take care of them, let them out into the wild. And then a couple will survive out of those. So on average, they have short lifespans, if you're to include those ones that died in childbirth. And then they're usually type 3 right here. So K-selected usually have a low biotic potential, and R, because they only have a couple of offspring at a time, and the R-selected have a high biotic potential, because in ideal conditions their population will grow a lot more rapidly because they have more generations and more offspring. So that is it for chapter 3.